The night wind carried the scent of rain and dust through the hollow of Dry Creek Canyon. The stars, faint and scattered, looked down upon a cabin that had seen too many winters and too much silence. Inside, a single candle flickered beside the bed of Mary Whitlock, a woman whose body had grown frail, yet whose spirit still clung fiercely to the world she loved. Her son, Ben, barely 16, sat by her side, holding her hand, his eyes heavy from nights without sleep. "Ma," he whispered, his voice breaking, "the fever's worse tonight." Mary smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides pain so her child won't feel it. "Don't you worry, Ben. The Lord's got his ways. You just keep that fire going." Outside, the coyotes howled against the canyon walls. The old family horse stamped nervously in the barn. The land around them stretched for miles, golden, wild, and untamed, land that had once belonged to the Apache before the settlers came. Mary's husband, Thomas, had died 2 winters ago after a mining accident, leaving her and Ben to tend to the small patch of land the government promised them. But now, men from town, men with papers, suits, and greed in their eyes, wanted that land. They claimed Thomas's deed had been flawed, that the soil and spring beneath it now belonged to the mining company. Ben had seen them ride up that afternoon. 3 men on bay horses, dust settling behind them like a storm. Their leader, Clayton Briggs, a man known for breaking more spirits than wild horses, had stepped off his saddle with a smirk. "You've had your time, boy," he'd said, spitting tobacco near the porch. "Your ma's sick. Ain't no way you can keep this place. We'll be back come dawn." Ben hadn't answered. He'd only gripped the old rifle by the doorway, his father's rifle, the wood worn smooth from years of use. Briggs had laughed and ridden away, his men following, their laughter echoing through the canyon like a cruel promise. Now, hours later, Ben sat beside his mother, torn between fear and love, watching her breathing grow shallower. Her hand trembled as she reached for his cheek. "Ben," she whispered, "listen to me, promise me something." Tears filled his eyes. "Anything, Ma. You keep this land. Your pa worked himself to the bone for it. In the spring, don't let them take the water. This land, it remembers. It has a soul." Her voice faltered, but her eyes shone with a strange, peaceful light. "There's a man who rides the ridges. Big fella, quiet as a shadow. They say he's Apache. Folks in town call him the Canyon Ghost. But I think he's more guardian than ghost. If you're in trouble, Ben, call for help. The canyon hears what the heart speaks." Her hand slipped from his, and the candle trembled as though the wind itself bowed in grief. Ben buried his mother at dawn beneath the oak tree she loved. The sky was painted in bruised purples and gold. He stood alone, the rifle slung over his shoulder, the house silent except for the wind whistling through the cracks in the wall. By noon, he saw dust rising again, the company men, riding fast. His chest tightened. He wasn't ready, but he had no choice. He'd promised. He saddled the old horse and rode toward the ridge, hoping for a miracle. The canyon stretched wide before him, carved deep by centuries of storms and sorrow. He stopped near the echoing walls and shouted, his voice breaking into the emptiness. "Help me, please. They're coming for my land." His cry scattered into the wind, bouncing between cliffs and stone until it faded into nothing. He sat still, his eyes burning, ashamed of believing his mother's words were anything more than a dying dream. But somewhere far beyond the ridge, a hawk circled, and in the shadows of red rock, a tall figure paused mid-stride. Taza, once a warrior of the Chiricahua Apache, had lived alone in these canyons for over a decade. He had seen his people driven out, their villages burned, their spirits broken by men who took more than they ever gave. He had stopped fighting years ago, tired of blood, tired of revenge. Yet, when the echo of a boy's cry reached him, it stirred something long buried, a memory of his own son, lost to sickness during the long march. He turned his horse toward the sound. By the time the sun touched the rim of the canyon, Ben was back at the cabin. The 3 riders appeared over the ridge, just as promised. Clayton Briggs grinned when he saw the boy alone. "Didn't think we'd come," he sneered. "This land ain't yours anymore." Ben raised the rifle. His hands shook, but his aim was steady. "My ma said this land remembers who loves it. You'll have to ride through me first." The men laughed, cruel and confident. Briggs motioned for his men to spread out. That's when a low rumble filled the air, not thunder, not the wind. Hoofbeats, heavy and fast, rolled across the canyon floor. From the dust rose a horse unlike any the men had seen, black as obsidian, mane whipping like fire. The rider upon it was taller than any man they'd met, his long hair tied with red cloth, his eyes like storm clouds. He wore the faded beads and buckskin of the Apache, and at his side hung a curved blade that gleamed in the morning light. He stopped between the cabin and the intruders. Silence fell heavy. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Who the hell are you?" Briggs barked. The Apache dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the dust. His voice was deep and calm. "The land doesn't belong to you." Briggs spat. "It belongs to whoever signs the deed." The Apache's eyes didn't waver. "Paper doesn't make you rightful. Only blood and care do. This boy's mother gave her heart to this ground. You gave it greed." Briggs laughed nervously. "You think you can stop us? There's 3 of us, old man." Without another word, the Apache moved, swift as lightning, silent as shadow. One of the riders reached for his gun, but before he could draw, the Apache had disarmed him, the weapon skittering across the dirt. The second rider tried to charge, only for the Apache's horse to rear, knocking him to the ground. Briggs backed away, realizing too late that this was no ordinary man. The boy stood frozen, heart pounding. The Apache's voice thundered across the canyon. "This land is watched. The canyon remembers her wish. Go, before it remembers you as trespassers." Briggs scrambled onto his horse, eyes wide with fear. "You're mad," he shouted, but his voice cracked. The men fled down the trail, their shouts fading into the distance. Ben stood trembling, unable to speak. The Apache turned toward him, his face softening. "Your mother," he said quietly, "she had a strong heart. I heard her words long before this morning." Ben swallowed hard. You heard her?" The Apache nodded. "The canyon carries the voices of those who love deeply. Her spirit still moves here. She asked for protection, and the wind brought it to me." Ben lowered the rifle, tears streaking down his dirt-stained cheeks. "She said someone might come. I didn't believe her. She believed in more than men," the Apache said, looking toward the oak tree in the distance. "She believed in the bond between the land and the heart." For days after, Taza stayed with the boy, helping him repair the cabin, teaching him how to read the sky for storms, how to track the flow of water beneath the ground, how to listen, not just with ears, but with soul. When the company men returned weeks later with legal papers and armed deputies, they found the boy's land protected by more than courage. The Apache had ridden into town days before, carrying the original deed Thomas Whitlock had signed, found among old government files he knew how to access through an ally, a missionary who once worked with his tribe. The deed proved the land's boundaries, stamped and sealed. Briggs was arrested for forgery and fraud. The mining company backed off, unwilling to stir more trouble. Ben stayed on the land, tending to the crops, guarding the spring his mother had loved. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, he'd see a figure riding the horizon, a tall man on a black horse, silhouetted against the dying light. Sometimes, the wind carried a low hum, like a chant half remembered from another world. Years later, when Ben had grown into a man with children of his own, he told them the story. He pointed to the canyon, where the echoes still lived. "That's where your grandma's wish was heard," he'd say. "And that's where a giant Apache saved everything we had, not for gold, not for glory, but because he understood something we all forget." His daughter, eyes wide, once asked him what that was. Ben looked out across the land, the wind brushing his hair, and smiled softly. "That the earth listens to kindness. That love doesn't die with the body, it echoes, waiting for someone brave enough to hear it." When Ben grew old, and the world around him began to change, roads paved, towns built, names forgotten, he still visited his mother's grave beneath the oak. Each time, he found a single eagle feather laid upon the stone. He never saw who placed it there, but he knew. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a black horse still roamed the canyon. The Apache had long vanished, but some nights, when the moon was full and the air still, the villagers swore they heard the faint rhythm of hooves and a whisper carried by the wind, like a promise kept.